Hello everybody, welcome back to Instant Release, and today we're going to talk about a camera that I wasn't really expecting on reviewing at all, or anytime soon, and that camera is the Sony A6500. Before saying anything else, I need to thank my friend Annabelle for loaning that camera to me, because this is her personal camera that she has given me for review, really. That's really what this is about. So, thank you, Annabelle. Without you, I wouldn't have been able to review a Sony camera for a long time. So let's all thank Annabelle for a second. Now, what is the A6500? The A6500 was released back in 2017, so we're in 2026. It's been quite a while that this camera has been on the market, or out of the market, really. But the thing that the A6500 was supposed to be the high-end version of the A6300 that was released in 2016. Differences compared to the A6300 are not that, much. There's not that much different about the A6500 compared to the A6300, but in theory, it's supposed to make the camera much more usable. So the main difference is the presence of IBIS in the camera body. So we have, I think, 3 stops IBIS. I think it's rated at three stops. I haven't been able to get 3 stops of stabilization out of it. We're going to talk about it later, a bit more in more detail. Also, it had considerably improved buffer and burst performance compared to the A6300, which had quite a short buffer when you wanted to shoot at 11 frames per second, because it had an additional chip to process the file writing to the SD card and whatnot. So that was another usability improvement. And the last improvement that the A6500 has over the A6300 is that it has a deeper and slightly larger grip. And that's about all the differences that there are. The sensor is the same, the EVF is the same, the back screen. Oh yeah, the back screen has touch capabilities now, although it's just really for the focus point, not really for the menus or anything like that. You can still double tap, move your pictures around in playback mode, so that's quite a nice improvement as well. But the battery is the same. In fact, the battery life is shorter because of the IBIS and the newer chip, for the file treatment. The back screen resolution is the same, and the back screen hinge is the same, the autofocus is the same, the video is the same. Pretty much everything else is the same besides these 3 or 4 things that I mentioned. So, why should you buy an A6500 and not an A6400 instead? Because, that was really the biggest question that I had myself when I looked at the A6500 initially, because, I had to look at some of the Sony options that Annabelle was looking for, because I helped her choosing her camera, and the A6500, she got that camera specifically instead of the A6300 because it was a very good price. Because initially I did not recommend the A6500 to her because A6500s that I could see on the market were super expensive compared to the almost identical without the IBIS A6300. So, why would you buy an A6500 today? Well, I think there are a few reasons, and I discovered that the A6500 personally would be my choice. If I was going for an A6000 line camera, it would even be my choice ahead of cameras like the A6600 or even the A6700. And I'm going to explain to you why. So, let's start with the body design and handling. There's only really one problem about this body design, and that's the fact that there's no front dial. This is a problem that has been fixed by the A6700, but to be completely honest with you, after using that camera for about a month, I'm not really seeing that much of an improvement that front dial would have, because the rest of the camera is really customizable, and I'm able to, there are some cameras where I'm really pissed that I'm not having a second dial. Like the Canon M50, I was really pissed I didn't have a second dial. The LX5 was also a camera that I was pissed about, that kind of thing. But there are cameras, I'm going to show you one right now, where I'm not really that pissed that I have a dial with more functionality, or a dial and a half, like I like to call it, like the Lumix G3. The Lumix G3 has just one dial in the back here, But you can press it and you can access your other exposure options like that. And I do not have a problem with that camera specifically because it's pretty simple. You have the right function buttons that you want. You have all the buttons that are not programmable, but you have all buttons that you want in the back. And the camera is really usable. And if the camera is really usable, like it is like, you know, by default coming out of the box with the 2 function buttons that you can reprogram and stuff, I do not have an issue with the camera only having one dial as long as that dial allows us to control the camera properly and efficiently. And that's very much what the A6500, A6300, 6400 have, is that despite not having a front dial on the grip, they do have, you know, a pretty decent and well-placed dial on the top plate, and they do have like a wheel in the back. The wheel I do not like generally. Like, I don't really care generally if the camera has the wheel in the back or not. I do not like that dial design, but I do admit that sometimes for menus, for some parameters and whatnot, when you have your camera like in front of you like this, having a wheel on top, like on top of the body, looking down, it's actually not that bad of a design, and to me it's very much still like a dial and a half when it comes to exposure compensation, exposure parameters and whatnot. I'm mostly using the top dial here for like shutter speed, and for the aperture I'm using a little bit the dial in the back. But I'm going to talk about the lens that most of the lenses I've been using actually have aperture rings, either on the lens itself, like this TTRZ 27mm 2.8 that Annabelle loaned me, or, I don't know, Nikon F-mount lenses that I've been adapting with that Nikon F2 E-mount adapter. They all have aperture rings, so I don't really have to worry about the aperture control on that camera as long as, you know, the lens, you know, goes well with that. All that being said, though, I feel, honestly, like the A6500, even if you're using, I don't know, the kit lens, which does not have an aperture ring, but uses the back wheel as the aperture parameter control, well, I still think that's quite okay because I'm not changing my aperture on the fly all the time. However, when shooting in manual mode, I am shooting my shutter speed over all the time. So that's, you know, something to keep in mind. Also, when it comes to exposure compensation in like semi-automatic modes, you know, you just hit the bottom button on the D-pad in the back and you can adjust it with your top dial. You don't have to use the wheel in the back if you don't want to. So that's something that I quite like. So when it comes to the controls, honestly, I thought I would have a lot more complaints than I actually have. Now, all of those things aside, when it comes to the ergonomics, the grip is actually very nice. I was really surprised. I did not think that the larger grip compared to the A6300 and A6400 would make that much of a difference, but it really does. I have quite large hands, and they go like a glove on the A6500. My pinky is dingling, but that's such a small camera, I don't really care. That's almost like having a Fujifilm camera with a nicely designed grip. That's exactly what the A6500 is to me. It's like close in terms of feeling, in terms of size and whatnot to my XT1, except my XT1 is taller and it's a bit heavier and the grip is not well designed. This is exactly the opposite of, let's say, the A6300, which I tested in the store a few years back. The A6300, the A6400, they have a really shallow grip. I do not like that grip design at all. I felt cramped on it, and I really don't like the way that those cameras handle. To me, the only 3 cameras I would consider in the A6000 lineup would be the A6500, 6600, and A6700 because they have large grips, which are much nicer, you know, proportions and design and whatnot. And out of all of those 3, ergonomically, because I have tested all of them in stores and whatnot with friends that have them, I think the A6600 is a bit stupid. That grip is very large for the size of the camera that goes behind it. And the A6700, well, the camera is much larger compared to the A6500. When you look at, you know, the top plate, you see the camera is much thicker. And having that larger grip on the A6700 is nice, but I would actually prefer to have a smaller camera, and the A6500 is what a smaller camera in that kind of form factor and control layout would be. So I think the grip size of the A6500 is actually perfect for that camera size. And I think that's the sweet spot in terms of ergonomics, and I quite like it. Compared to the A6300 and A6500, you also have an additional top function button, which brings it in line with like the A7 III, A7 II, which have also these two C1 and C2 buttons on the top plate right here. And I think, honestly, that this is probably one of the best layout when it comes to function buttons themselves, because you have your two buttons here. I'm able to use them as, you know, autofocus settings and whatnot. I have my last function button in the back here. I have a function here for like the quick menu, and that's like, I don't know how many reprogrammable buttons are on the A63, and mostly the A6500. The A63 has one button. Let's see if you recall what I just said 5 minutes ago. But anyway, the A6500 has like what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 function buttons that you can reprogram. That's actually excellent on a camera this size. So yeah, I'm not gonna complain too much about the ergonomics of the A6500. I thought it would be like a contention point. I'm actually quite surprised how well this camera handles, and I guess this can transpire by me talking about it. So yeah, build quality next. Build quality is weird, I will say that much. The camera is pretty heavy for the size that it is. It's about 500 grams. A bit less than that, like 475 or something. So it's not super light, but it's not heavy. It's not a heavy camera, and it feels pretty dense for what you have in your hand. It's pretty much all magnesium alloy body. The bottom, there is one half of the bottom that I think is plastic. No, that's magnesium alloy body as well. There's a few plastic parts here and there, but overall the camera is very well constructed. Of course, you will have the classical edges where the paint is coming off, because that's a Sony camera and paint is coming off Sony camera edges on a regular basis. But other than that, the camera is very well constructed. The dials feel good, the buttons feel tight, like there's no huge problem. I do have one major problem with that, although, because well, it is marketed on Sony's website. That goes for both the A6300 and the A6400 as well. I think this goes also for the A6600, but don't quote me on that. I haven't really looked at that camera in much detail. But for the 3 previous cameras that I mentioned, these cameras are cited on Sony's website as being weather resistant. But I have had my fair share of weather resistant cameras already, and this is not what this is. Let me explain. What a weather resistant camera is supposed to be is supposed to, I'm going to take my A1 Mark II as an example of that. This is a camera that I would consider to be rugged. A camera that is weather sealed. You can go in the rain, snow, dust, whatever. This camera is going to handle it. The side door here is rubber, so it's going to create a good seal for the ports as long as this is still closed. That's good. All of the buttons, they feel really a bit mushy because they have like a rubber dome behind them with a rubber seal as well. So, sorry. So water won't get in. That's the second thing. Third thing is that if you open any of the other remaining doors on these cameras, like the SD card slot, you can see that you have a foam seal around here, and if you open that on the door itself, you have a foam seal on the battery door itself. That's a weather seal camera, because every ingress point on that camera is sealed by some kind of foam or rubber. That's the same kind of deal with other cameras that I would consider to be less sealed than my Olympus, like my X Pro 2. You can see that you have rubber around the SD card door, you have foam around the battery door, you have a rubber side flap here for the ports. You can see that everything is sealed properly. That's not the case of the A6500. Sony mentioned in the weather resistance segment on their website that they have improved, the rubber seals under the buttons, around the dials and whatnot. So yeah, I'm actually pretty sure that the A6500, if you drop some water on the buttons, it's not going to be that much of a problem. Where I have a problem though is that around the hot shoe, you have a ton of contacts. These contacts, they are widely known for being a problem when it comes to weather resistance. And if you have some water on them, you will have like an accessory not supported message. That didn't happen to me because I did not want to carry that camera in the rain, but this is something that happens on Sony cameras a lot, and you see people taping up their hot shoe if they don't use it. Second thing is that you have a pop-up flash. Pop-up flashes are notoriously hard to seal, and this is, I mean, Sony did not even encounter that problem because they did not try to fix it. There is absolutely no seal around the flash here. Not on the flash, not around where the flash goes. That flash is on the top plate. This is very susceptible to get water on, and it is not sealed at all. Another thing that is not sealed at all is the battery door, where you also have the SD card. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Having the SD card in the battery compartment, I'm not a fan of it. It's okay generally. Like the door itself is far away from the tripod mount, but it's just like a nice thing to have it on the side and not at the bottom. I understand the size constraint though, so that's just something I would mention, but it's not ideal. It's not my preferred way to do it. But yeah, that door, no seals whatsoever. So this is not sealed as far as I'm concerned. And the last thing, which is I guess the biggest offender here, is that pretty fancy door on the side for the ports, for like the USB ports and the HDMI port and the microphone port. That door, like, you know, has a pretty nice mechanism to it. It's like much nicer than like rubber flaps on those cameras, or like this simple hinge door that I have on my Fuji. This is a nice mechanism, and it's a much more like resistant door in the sense that it's hard plastic. It's not rubber, it's not soft plastic that can deteriorate or whatever. It's hard plastic, but it's not sealed either. There is no seals on the body, no seals on the door, meaning that if you have water coming on the side of the camera, which can happen, they will go into the HDMI port, they will go into the USB port, they will even go into the microphone port, which is at the bottom. So really, I'm really not impressed by the weather sealing of that camera, and as far as I'm concerned, this is a camera that can handle some of it, but it is not a weather sealed camera. It's about as sealed as my Canon M50 was, which is pretty basically it isn't. That's one thing I wanted to say. So that's all pretty much for the body. The biggest issue that I have with it, it doesn't have a frontal, but I thought it would be a problem. It's actually not that much of a problem. And yeah, the lack of weather sealing. Another issue that I've kind of have with it is the size of the eye cup. My God, look at the size of this thing. It's huge compared to the camera. And when it sticks out quite a bit. And when I'm putting that camera into a bag, this rubber part gets caught on everything all the time. So generally what I end up doing, I know this is not like the recommended way, but I always just remove it, and this is much cleaner to look, much cleaner design, much sleeker. You put into a bag, it doesn't cut it's not cutting on, it's not catching. English is hard. It's not catching on anything. I don't have to worry about it really. It's just, you know, that's something that I prefer, and it's hard plastic. You know, I'm not gonna have any gunk going on there, sticking on there, because the rubber eye cup really catches everything that goes around, dust, small hair, whatever. It just sticks on there. It's just a little bit gross after a while, so I just remove it most of the time. If I know it's going to be sunny, I'm going to have it in my bag. If I really need it, I'm going to put it on the camera like that, but it's not really something that I'm going to use very much. So yeah, okay, that's all of the physical characteristic of the camera, how good it is, how bad it is, whatever. Now I want to talk about the specs and the performance and whatnot. So this is where I think the A6500 impressed me the most. Honestly, I mean, that was something that pretty easy to see coming. When we are talking about Sony cameras, they really always go full throttle on the specs. So When it comes to the sensor, this camera has a 24 megapixel sensor, APS-C sized, which is very similar. I think it's the same sensor base as the one that I've been using in my X Pro 2, and before that my XT2, in my XH1. And I know this sensor, it's very, very good in terms of detail capture, in terms of dynamic range. It's one of the best sensors I've used in terms of that APS-C size. It's not as good as my Nikon Z6, for example, but that's a full-frame camera, much larger camera, not much more expensive, but more expensive camera still. And I wouldn't say that it's full frame image quality in there, but it's honestly not that far. The detail capture that you get out of that sensor is absolutely insane, especially if you manage to have a pretty sharp lens. So I've had this TTR 27mm f2.8. This is an extremely sharp lens. If you close it down a little bit, like at f4 or f5.6, it's a super sharp lens in the sensor, and I've seen the detail capture that this sensor can do. And my god, it's fucking great. Sorry for the curse words here, but like it's actually great. It's on par with my X-Trans 3 sensor in the X Pro 2, and that sensor does not have an anti-aliasing filter on it. So in terms of detail capture, it is second to none in that kind of price range and size class, really. Now, when it comes to other aspects of image quality, I think the A6500 has the ability to retain, a lot of dynamic range. It has quite a low noise level, even compared to my other Fujifilm cameras like the X Pro 2 that I just mentioned. It has a bit lower noise than the X Pro 2, even though they have the same sensor base. But the main thing that I noticed with the A6500 files is that the color response is very neutral. The raw files look very, very flat, and they need to be edited quite a bit to look good, which is not something that I have to do with any of my other cameras, like the Nikon Z6, like the Fujifilm X Pro 2, my EM1 Mark II, my Olympus EM1 Mark II. All of those cameras have pretty good raw colors, like I don't have to edit those files as much as I need to do that on the Sony A6500. So this is both a good and a bad thing in a way that those files, by being very neutral, they allow you to do a lot of things. Some cameras that have a very, very stylized color science, like the Fujifilm cameras, for example, they often, are not as good as other cameras that would have a more neutral response, because they have a style baked in the raw file, so it's a bit harder to make the files look how you want them to look. And if you're not vibing with the camera, I would say this can be a problem. But the Sony, you don't have that problem because it's very neutral and can basically massage the files however you like. But it's also negative because if you want to have nice looking JPEGs, for example, the A6500 is, I think, I've tested a bit of JPEG profiles, but none of them are good. Like, you don't have the same level of customization in JPEGs as you do with Olympus cameras. For Fujifilm cameras, even Nikon cameras, they have a lot more customization options. And I just think that the A6500 is great for people that like to edit photos on their computer, to sit down, like really like tune the colors very well and all of that. But it's not that good for people that just want good looking images straight out of camera. I don't think it's the camera for them. Now, when it comes to the autofocus, we don't have the newer real-time tracking autofocus that would appear in the A6400 and A6600. We have basically the same autofocus system as was in the A7 III, which is not to say it's a bad autofocus system, really. It's just a bit less refined in terms of interface. In terms of reliability, though, I was quite surprised to see that in good light, with like fast-moving subjects and whatnot, the A6500 is absolutely no problem. In bad light, though, I was really expecting this camera to be like rock solid, but the autofocus itself actually sometimes it's confused and straight up cannot focus. I've been using that camera mostly with manual focus lenses, so that hasn't really been a problem, but with the kit lens, with the TTR 27mm f2.8, and with the Sigma 60mm f2.8, it has been a bit of a problem on all three lenses. So I guess slow light is the Achilles heel of the A6500, but for that price and that size, don't have a ton of other options. Since we are on the subject of image quality, let's keep it to photography without, I want to do a more detailed segment about video, so I'm going to do that a bit later, but then let's stay focused on photography for a bit and talk about burst rates. The camera has, I think, 4 drive modes. You have single, burst, I think, low. What is it? What is the actual name of it? So we have, low, low, medium, high, and high plus. So low is 3 frames per second, medium is 6 frames per second, high is 8 frames per second. In all of those modes you have blackout plus real-time live view pretty much in between the frames, which is great if you want to track something and you don't want to have the subject wander too much on the sides of the frame. You want it to keep still in the center. That is going to be the best way to go. Now, when it comes to the high plus is 11 frames per second, and that will give you a slideshow mode, basically displaying in your viewfinder or on your screen the previous frame that has been captured while the current one is being captured. So at 11 frames per second, it's alright. I don't have much of a problem with this, but that's going to be coming at a latency problem or disadvantage, either way. Honestly, I've been quite impressed about the burst performance of the A6500 because you have a pretty deep buffer of about, 80 to 100 RAWs depending on your bitrate if you use like lossless compress or whatnot. And it's been quite good, honestly. Like, it's on par with cameras like my EM1 Mark II in terms of mechanical burst rates. The EM1 Mark II can go faster with electronic shutter, but it's not really the same thing. We're going to talk about electronic shutter a little bit, But to have that high mode at 8 frames per second with real view in between each frame each time is actually pretty good. I really like that. It's not something I was able to get on my X-T2, for example, which is using the same sensor with supposedly the same readout. It's the X-T2 could only do that at like 5 frames per second, which is quite a bit slower than 8 frames per second. So honestly, the A6500 coupled with that really good autofocus system in good light, honestly, it's quite a competent sports shooter and wildlife shooter and whatnot. So pair that with a long lens, and it's actually a very competent camera for those situations. So honestly, I'm pretty happy with that. Not much else to say. I will say though, the lack of UHS-2 card slot support is quite annoying actually. For those RAWs to be written on the card, I would have liked to have the ability to, write them down a little bit faster. But for photography, it's not too much of a problem. It's more a problem for videography, which we're going to talk about now. So, video on the A6500. I'm using the A6500 to record myself right now. This camera, I think, is a pretty good video tool because we have access to log profiles, we have pretty good preamps when it comes to sound recording. Hopefully I haven't fucked anything when I change my microphone. And we have pretty good autofocus as well. I can see I have my face detection working right now. And we have like S-Log2, S-Log3, we have HLG, we have a lot of options. Now, there are a few limitations though, which I'm going to talk about now. The first one is the sensor readout speed. We don't have access to 4K 60 at all, and the sensor rolling shutter in video is quite bad in 4K at the highest bitrate possible, like in 100 megabits per second, which is what we are using right now. So that's the biggest limitation of that camera, as well as the fact that it's only 8-bit 420, but at the same time, I can't really complain about that because that's exactly what I'm using on a daily basis with my EM1 Mark II. It's also 8-bit 420, and I'm perfectly fine with that, even with log profiles and color grading and whatnot. So really, I'm not really bothered too much about it. Now, when it comes to the video itself, it's pretty crisp because it's oversampled from a 6K readout, so I think it's pretty nice, honestly. And we are looking at a camera that can record really good quality footage, even if we only are if we only are in 8-bit, even if we don't have the best color grading capabilities or whatnot, we have pretty good noise performance, pretty good detail capture, and we have pretty good dynamic range too, thanks to those log profiles. Now, recording log in the Sony A6500 is not as easy as recording log in like the Fuji or the Olympus cameras that I've had. Basically, if you want to get the best out of those log profiles, you will have to overexpose your footage. Right now, we are overexposed at +2 stops, or even like a bit over because it's flashing +2. With my Olympus EM1 Mark II, I can't really do that, because if I do that, the highlights will be clipped, and some highlights will be clipped, and that would be a bit hard to fix in post. The EM1 Mark II is better at like 1.3 or 1 stop overexposed if I want to really have better noise in the shadows, but the A6500 can go at 2 stops or even over that. But that it's not like the stage that you have, that's a necessity that you will have to do, or otherwise you might as well not use the log profile and use a standard profile and use a lower ISO. So that's just something. We are ISO 2500 right now, which is quite high for an APS-C sensor, I admit, but honestly I think the image quality is still pretty good. I'm not in a super bright room right now, it's still pretty decent to me, so that's something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is your SD card. Right now I'm using a cheap UHS-2 card, which is not even a V30 or V60, but it's a UHS-2 card, which has the U3 speed setting on it. That card allows me to record at 100 megabits per second. But typically, my friend Annabelle, if I can find the little thing where I keep her SD card, gave me this SD card with it, which is a 64 gigabyte UHS-1 card, and this is V10 U1. And that card was only able to record 100 megabits per second, which I don't understand this limitation that Sony put on that card slot, because that's not a limitation that I've seen on any other camera. I remember my XH1 recording 200 megabits per second, and that was fine with like a U1 card or UHS-1 card, no problem. On the Sony A6500 it is a problem, apparently. On the X-T2 it was not a problem. On the A6500 it is. Both cameras are from the same era, they use the same cards and they record similar quality video. I don't know why that's a problem, but it is one. Anyway, the video capabilities of the A6500 itself are pretty good. I would say that it is definitely a camera that I would use for video. I think it's the best video I've had in in my hands, really. Maybe on par with like my Nikon Z6, but my Nikon Z6 does not have access to any log profiles, and that's the biggest problem of that camera to me. If you are recording in 8-bit, you can use 10-bit recording on that camera, but you will have an external recorder, and that's another expense I don't want to do. So really, the A6500, honestly, as far as video goes, I'm pretty happy with it. Now, this is not the end of my thoughts about the A6500. I do have some thoughts about everything else. So let's talk about my two biggest issues with the A6500. The first one is the battery life. The battery life on that camera is, I mean, it's quite okay for video. We can record about 30 minutes on a single charge, like 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how the camera overheats. But when it comes to photography, since you have IBIS, and it's not a battery that was meant to go into a camera that has IBIS and a constant power drain when the camera is turned on, and so the result is that the battery life is constantly a problem for me, because I always have to carry around at least one spare, maybe two, if I'm planning on shooting all day. Like if I'm just carrying the camera casually, shooting a picture, shooting some all day, but shooting pictures here and there of things I find interesting, then yeah, one battery should be plentiful for one day. But in one day I will shoot maybe what, like 100 pictures, maybe 100, 115, 25 pictures. That's not a lot of pictures, and that is already draining like 30-40% of the battery when I come home, which to me is a problem, because I've not had that on any other camera, and I'm gotta say I got quite spoiled with the Z6 battery life and my EM1 Mark II's battery life, which can last maybe a week of shooting like that, like casually, maybe 100 pictures there, 100 pictures another day. Shooting like that, it's actually quite easy on the batteries, and on my EM1 Mark II in particular, like those heavy batteries, large batteries, they last the whole day if I want to shoot an event, for example. That's not the same kind of battery performance that the A6500 has. The A6500, if I want to shoot all day, but like actively, at the end of the day, I'm not having 100 or 125 pictures. I'm having like 1,000 pictures. And I'm not going through one battery. I'm going through like 4 batteries, 5 batteries, or more. And that's just something that, to me, if I'm a professional and I want to shoot with that camera like really seriously, that's just not something that's suitable. That's just not something that I consider to be good enough in a lot of ways, and I would want to have something just simply better. And I think the A6500 does not meet my requirements personally. Like, I understand the camera is small, I understand that you have constraints, and in terms of size, in terms of heat, in terms of, you know, power draw and whatnot, but I think this battery is not good enough, and that has been, I think, a complaint about Sony cameras of the A6000 line for a long time, and that's the reason why the A6600 exists. So there's that. Another thing which I'm not particularly fond of is actually the IBIS. The IBIS in this camera is really weak, actually. I found it's not, maybe I'm spoiled by like Olympus IBIS, which is awesome, but I found like if I got 2 stops of stabilization with the IBIS, I was good, like really good. I did a good job. More likely it's like 1.5 stops at best, which is like basic kit lens type of stabilization. This is the same stabilization I would get of like this 16 to 50 kit lens. So if you plan on using just a lens like that, or any lens that Sony makes for the E-mount that has OSS, which is optical steady shot, or OIS, or optical image stabilization, then you don't really need to have an A6500 to have the same level of stabilization. Just get the lens with OSS, get an A6300, and you can have pretty much the same thing. Where the stabilization comes handy, the IBIS I mean, is when you're using small prime lenses like this TDI Zen 27mm f2.8. That's a lens that does not have OSS, and having IBIS is quite useful for that. But compared to using another camera that would have IBIS, the A6500's IBIS really disappointed me in the sense that I almost didn't see its effects. I always had to increase my ISO much further than I would have thought to have sharp pictures, and that was a bit annoying. That's not something I can do. I have to do with my EM1 Mark II. That's not something that I have to do with my EM5 Mark II. Not even like other cameras that have much weaker IBIS, like my Z6 or my previous XH1, did not have to do that. Those cameras could handle like at 40mm equivalent, 1 second handheld. That was something in the realm of possibilities, right? Not with the A6500. I have to go like down to 1/15 of a second to get something sharp at 40mm, which is like basically like under 2 stops of stabilization. So that's not really something that I would say is impressive at all. So, conclusion time. Conclusion time is basically going something like this. Taking independently, every spec and every aspect of the A6500 are not impressive. The sensor is pretty much the same sensor you can find in other cameras. The IBIS is absolutely not the best. The autofocus can sometimes be confused, and though it's good overall, it can be a bit of a problematic thing to have, especially in low light. The video specs are great overall, like they're very good, but only have 8-bit, and there are other cameras in the same price range which will deliver better video. You have a small body, but you don't have the smallest body around in that kind of price point again. And burst rate is good, but you also, in that kind of price point, you have better burst rate and better buffer sizes and whatnot. You have a very very mediocre battery life. You only have a single card slot, which is not that fast, and you don't have the most customization, most function buttons, and you don't have a front dial, whatever. The EVF is also, I haven't talked about the EVF too much on the back screen, but the back screen and the EVF, they are kind of mediocre, I would say. The back screen especially, it's 16:9 aspect ratio, which I can understand for the format of the camera, but for the stills camera, it feels kind of weird because we don't even have a million dots on that screen. It's quite low. It's quite low resolution actually, and it's like 920k dots or something, which is not a lot. Quite dated, and it's 16:9 aspect ratio. So when we are shooting 3:2 in stills mode, we are losing even more resolution on the side because we have black bars. It's good for video, but for standard stills mode is not that great. And the EVF, you think, like when you look at the specs, the EVF would be absolutely good because it's a 2.36 million dot EVF with 0.7x magnification, and that it's OLED and everything. You have 100 Hertz refresh rate. It's actually good on paper, but the main problem that I have with it is that I have glasses, as you can see. And if you are using the eyepiece, it's absolutely impossible to see the entire frame because the eye point on that viewfinder is super short. So I need to really have my eye jammed in there. So I always need to remove my glasses to see the viewfinder clearly and in its entirety. And if I want to keep my eyeglasses, that means I have to remove this, which is a bit annoying again. So there's that. So yeah, taking into isolation, all of those specs do not make a compelling camera, I don't think. But where the camera gets, a bit of attention back, from me at least, is that it's all in a package that is smaller than any other camera in the same price point or in the same performance class that you can get. Like, you don't have anything smaller with IBIS, that APS-C sensor, which is amazing, with that video specs, with the pop-up flash, an EVF, a tail screen, all of those things. You don't have any other camera that can match the A6500 for the size. And then we have the price point. And the price point is another bit of a hit and miss, I would say, with the A6500. Sometimes you have very good deals, and sometimes you have just overpriced cameras. The A6500, I think, is in a bit of a weird grey zone because it's substantially more expensive than the A6300 in average, but not that much more different in terms of practice. But sometimes you can find an A6500 for a good price, and that A6500 is really like worth buying over any A6300, even A6400. I'm losing myself in these Sony names, but the main thing that you need to understand here is that the A6500 to me is a sweet spot into the A6000 line. Annabelle, my friend, bought that A6500 for 580 euros 2 years ago, pretty much. And it came with a kit lens, which if you want to buy that lens, it's like, what, 80 bucks to get used? So she basically got the camera for like 500 bucks. Which I think is a really good deal for the package that this camera is. She wanted something small with a lot of specs that you could do, travel camera and whatnot, and this is exactly what this camera is. And honestly, I think she got a really, really good deal. But it's 500 bucks is basically what you pay for an A6300 in good shape, which this A6500 is. But the main thing here is to understand that it's really situational when it comes to value and pricing. But I think it's still kind of a sweet spot into the A6000 family in the sense that it has IBIS, has a good sensor, it has a good autofocus from the A6300 and whatnot. It's not the A64, A6600 with a newer BIS XR processor and whatnot, but it's still good enough in my opinion. And it does not cost nearly as much as the A6600, for example. And on top of that, it's the only, that's something I talked about at the very beginning of the video, I haven't talked about it yet. The A6500 has become my favorite A6000 camera because it has both IBIS, which works, not super reliably and not super great and whatnot, but it's still IBIS when you have a vintage lens adapted and you set the focal length and you have a bit of stabilization. That's always nice to have. But it also have a pop-up flash. The A6600 and A6700 do not have a pop-up flash, I think for weather sealing reasons, but having a pop-up flash on a camera this small that has IBIS and that sensor is actually good. And flash photography is something that I really want to do more, and having a little flash on the A6500 which can bounce back with your finger, it's actually good. I really like that. And yeah, it's something that I think makes the A6500 a bit unique in that line. Like the A6300 and the A6400, they both have a flash, but they don't have IBIS, and the A6600 and the A6700, they have IBIS, but they don't have a flash. The A6500 has both. So I think, also coupled with the fact that it has the nicest grip out of all of the A6000 cameras, I think this is quite a bit of a nice camera overall. Like, taking a step back and looking at all of the things, I think the A6500 is an amazing camera. Like, packing that much into a camera this small is honestly pretty impressive, and I think makes the camera a bit underrated, I would say. Like, I don't not see a lot of people talking about the A6500 too much. I see mostly the A6300 being mentioned as the value king, then the A6400, and then the A6700, and the A65 and A6600. Less so the A6600 because it's newer and whatnot, but the A6500 always gets forgotten as, you know, an older camera that's not really worth buying. But it is very much worth looking at, for sure. So, yeah, this is all I had to say about this camera. I do not have my usual review process because that's not my camera, and I do not get to keep that camera for month and month and month. I'm giving that camera back in early March. So yeah, I basically have a month and a half to review that camera, and had to get as much samples as quick as possible with that thing. That also counts for video. So hope you enjoyed watching this, and see you in the next one. See ya.